Today we're making this. So we'll chain 85. So I've got my 85 chains. I'm going to chain 2 and then half double crochet across. We'll do that down the row. So I'm going to repeat this until I have 44 rows. So I'll see you back in a little while. Okay, so now we've finished the back panel and we are going to start the front. Now this is going to be almost the same, but just slightly different. So if the back panel was like this, the front panel will be like that, only even. So we're going to start the exact same way that we did with the back panel. We're going to chain 85 plus our extra 2. Then we'll half double crochet all the way down just like we did before, but this time we're only going to do 22 rows before we do something different. So I will see you at the end of that. Okay, so I've got my first 22 rows for the front panel. So I'm going to start the next row the same as I normally would. I've already chained my 2, but this time I'm just going to do 52 stitches. Okay, so now that I've done my 52, instead of continuing for the last 33, I'm going to chain 33 instead. This is now what's going to create that kind of V shape so that this can be a Henley top. So I'm going to chain 2 more. And then just pretend that this is my foundation chain. I am now going to go back to half double crochets. So I've just finished half double crocheting down that chain. So now I'm just going to connect to this previous row and just keep going. Down this way. If this stitch right here gets a little stretched out as you're working with this, especially if you are trying it on along the way, don't worry too much about it. That's going to end up being hidden, but just that was something that kept happening to me, so maybe try to be aware of that and just try to make sure you're not stretching it. So once I finish this row, I will go back to doing all of this, and I will just do 21 more rows this way and we'll be finished with the front. Okay, so now we've got our back and the front and we're ready to join them together. So I'm going to use a slip stitch to join these 14 rows in on each side coming from the shoulder. Now that I've flipped it to go up the sides, I'm going to start at the bottom and go 52 stitches up. That'll put the bottom of the armpit at the same level as our Henley neckline. Alright, so now we're ready to go ahead and move on to the sleeves. I've already got one finished here so that I can show you a clip of what that looks like. And now we're ready to start the next one. I like to start at the bottom of the armpit so that when you stitch it back up, the seam is underneath the arm, but it really isn't super noticeable either way since we're turning it inside out. So we will start by doing a slip stitch to join. Then we're going to chain 66 because to keep with this vertical pattern that makes it look a little bit more like it's a professionally knit piece, I do the arms vertically. That makes things a little trickier if you're trying to do a tapered sleeve, but I think I figured out a pattern that hopefully makes sense when I explain. This pattern I'm going to show you for the sleeves gives you a little bit of a taper to that sleeve when you reach the cuff so that it's not just like a big puffy sleeve. So we're going vertically, so we're going to chain 66. Then I'm going to chain 2 more for my turning chain, then half double crochet all the way to the top. So okay, so now that we've reached the sleeve opening again, we're going to skip 1 chain and slip stitch in the next to join, then do 2 more slip stitches to start our next row, flip it over, then half double crochet in the 3rd stitch from our chain, and half double crochet back down the end of the row. Okay, so once we've done our 2 rows of half double crochet, we're going to chain 1, then do about 45 to 50 single crochets. I'll tell you why I'm giving you a range of stitches when we get there. I'm going to start with 50. Now I will go back to half double crochets to finish up the row. So you're going to repeat this set of 3 rows until you're all the way around the arm, just making sure that every 3rd row, when you're down towards the cuff, that you do somewhere between 40 and 50 single crochet stitches. And the reason we do that range is because it's a little hard to see right now, but when you switch from single to half double crochet, it makes a little bit, I don't even know what you would call that. It makes this like little seam where you can see the transition. And when you make the whole sleeve, if you make that transition in the exact same spot every time, it creates like a visible seam in the sleeve. So moving that transition spot around in the sleeve kind of helps just make that look a little bit more seamless. If you don't really care about that, you can just do it in the same spot all the time. That's fine. This is just after much trial and error. This was the sleeve that I liked the look of the best. So I usually do, like, I did 50 single crochets for this set. The next set I'll do 40. The next set I'll do 45 and then go back and repeat. But really any amount just between 40 and 50 for each set of 3 will work. So I'm going to repeat that, making sure your single crochets are towards the cuff to get that nice taper to the sleeve, and then we'll be finished and we can start working on the cuffs. Okay, so now that we've got our sleeve finished, we are ready to do the cuffs, and we're going to do this the same way for both cuffs and for, if I can get this in the shot, the trim at the bottom of the sweater. So this first part is optional, but I find it just makes things a lot easier, and especially if you're trying to make sure that your cuffs are even and that you haven't made one tighter than the other. So if this helps you, you can do this, and if you don't think you need to, then you can just skip this step. So we're going to find our seam here. And do a single crochet, and we're just going to single crochet around the edge of the cuff. Then when I'm back to where I started, I will just slip stitch to join these two together. And this way, once you've done one cuff, then you'll know I just did 49 stitches around the edge of this, so I can make sure I do that same amount for the other sleeve. So now that we've finished this, or if you skip this step, we're going to chain 10. Plus one more to be our turning chain, and then single crochet down our row. Then we're going to join it back to the arm by slip stitching into the next chain, slip stitch one more to start the next row. Now to create a ribbed effect, we're going to actually be working in the back loop. So instead of going into this loop, I will go into the back loop. Chain one, and then repeat. And if you need a little bit more guidance on that or on this process of crocheting down the side, I do actually have a crochet tips for beginners video that I will link here if you need just a little bit more explanation on those. So we'll just repeat this around the edge of the arm. It'll look like this when we're finished, and you can see it has this ribbing effect to it. And we'll do the same exact thing around the bottom hem of the sweater to get this trim at the bottom. Okay, so before we start the hood, I wanted to just show you what the finished one looks like up close. So we're gonna make this in two halves and do it separately before we join to the neck. We're going to chain 55. Then I'm going to chain 2 more for my turning chain and half double crochet down the row. Okay, so I've got my 10 rows. Now we're going to do 9 more rows, decreasing by 2 each time, and there's a few different ways to do that, but this is the one that I think works the best for this and that I like doing the best. So we're going to, instead of doing a full half double crochet in this stitch, we're actually going to kind of combine these two stitches. So we'll yarn over, pull through once, twice, then yarn over, pull through once, and then pull through all 4 of these. And that'll make our half double crochet between these two. So we're going to do that twice. Turning those first 4 chains into 2. Then we will just half double crochet normally down the row. Then we're going to start our next row the same way we have been, because we want to make sure the decreases are all happening on the same side. So we will half double crochet our way up this row until there are 4 stitches left. Okay, so now that I have 4 chains left, I'm going to do the same thing again. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 4 to combine 2 chains into 1. And now you can start to see how it's slanting downwards. So then I would just chain my 2 and repeat that process for 7 more rows until you have a total of 19. And when you're finished, it'll look like this. And that gives us that nice slant for the hood. Okay, so now I've got both halves done. And we're ready to stitch them together. So we're gonna have the curved sides together. And I'm just slip stitching my way all the way around to the front. Okay, so now we're ready to attach the hood to the neck of the hoodie. I've got everything inside out still. So I've got the seam of the hood facing upwards. You want to make sure that you have your hood flipped down towards you so that when we turn it inside out, the seam won't be showing. So I have 1 stitch marker here. My other ones are buried under a pile of yarn. But I like to use these just to kind of hold this in place a little bit. So I've got it set here at the center, and I'm just going to start at this side and slip stitch all the way along. Okay, so now that we've got the hood stitched on, we're gonna flip the whole thing right side out. Right side in, right side out. Okay, so this is what we're working with now, and I'm gonna show you this finished on the lighter one, just so that it's a little bit easier to see and you can kind of see what I'm talking about by what it looks like when it's done. So starting down here on the left side facing the front, or whichever side you want the buttons to be on, but starting on the left side, we're just going to do a row of double crochet all the way around the whole hood and all the way back down. And what this does that's going to help create the slot, the casing, I don't know what you want to call that, for the drawstring, but that also is what makes this a Henley shirt, is we're going to be able to stitch our buttons to that double crochet, and that will create this overlap so that once you button it, it's all nice and seamless. Okay, so I just got finished doing that row of double crochets all the way around the hood, and now I've come down to the bottom of that V we created, and I'm going to just slip stitch this in place. So now we've got this really nice flat laying Henley sort of shirt. And next we are going to do the second part of the tube, the slot. I don't know what to call it. Casing sounds weird because it sounds like sausage. But the tube that we're creating for the drawstring to go through. So I'm going to start this not all the way down here. I'm going to start this about like 6 stitches past the seam of the neck. So you can see I've got my seam right here. So I'm about 6 stitches down. Okay, we're zoomed in a little bit more now. we're actually going to be doing a row of double crochets in the same row as before, just on the back side, if that makes sense. So these are the loops that we just got done crocheting in. So we're going to be working in the same ones, just on the back side. Okay, so I've got my crochet hook kind of in between the double crochets, and I'm going to slip stitch and chain. Then I'm going to go all the way around the hood into about 6 stitches past the other seam, just doing this, trying to get all my extra strings out of the way, just doing these double crochets in the same row, just kind of between the stitches. If it helps you, it helps me. I kind of take this previous row and fold it back so I can make sure I'm going along this seam. Then when you're finished, you'll have these 2 layers that will eventually close up. Okay, so before we move this giant blob out of the way, before we finish up that unnamed tube in the hoodie, we're gonna actually make the drawstring. So for this, you're just gonna chain 180. So we're just gonna do this 1 row of slip stitches so that this stays relatively thin, but it just will have like a little bit more stability than just the row of chains. But if you like just the row of chains, that should be fine too. Okay, so I've got my drawstring all finished. And the reason I did that first is because instead of closing this up and then trying to thread the drawstring through it, it was way easier for me to just kind of lay the drawstring in here and then crochet around. Oh, you can't even see what I'm doing. To lay the drawstring in here and then crochet around it. So all we're gonna do is lay the drawstring in here, and it can get a little clunky. Take this out. But once you've got it wrapped up in there, it'll lay nice and look nice. So we've got our drawstring in there. And then we're just going to slip stitch those 2 rows of double crochets closed around the drawstring. It'll look like this on both sides, and then when you're finished, bring in the light colored one again. When you're finished, you'll have this like really nice edge around the hood that helps keep its shape. and then you're able to kind of adjust the drawstring really easily if you need to. We'll do this last step and then we just have the pocket. We're on the home stretch. Okay, for the last part that we're crocheting, the last bit before we do the buttons, is the pocket. I'm going to start by chaining 12. Chain 2 more for our turning chain. Half double crochet all the way down. We're going to add 1 for the next 3 rows. So the way we do that is instead of chaining 2 and turning, we're going to chain 3 to create that extra stitch. Count down 1, 2, 3. So it started to slant upwards a little bit here. So we're going to do that with the addition of 1 more chain 2 more times. Okay, so you should have 4 rows and be at 15 stitches. Now we're going to do the next 2 rows, adding 2 extra stitches each time. Okay, so now we are at 6 rows and 19 stitches. So for the next row, we're just going to do 1 and we're going to add 4 more stitches at the end. Okay, so now we're at 8 rows and 23 chains. So one more time, we're going to go up this row and then this time we're going to be adding 8 stitches. Okay, so now that we're here, we're going to do 12 more rows at this length of 31. I know these look a little funny, how they look like stair steps, but we will straighten that out a little bit when we get ready to do the edges. Okay, so I've got my ascending rows and I've got 13 total rows across here. So now we're just going to repeat these in reverse order, decreasing each time obviously. So I'm going to start by going up 23 stitches and so on, counting down so that they're equal on each side. If you get to a point where you are decreasing while you're trying to come down, I would suggest just doing slip stitches until you get where you need to be so that it keeps this same sort of like step look to it. Then when we're finished with that, I'll show you how to make the edges look nice. Okay, so we've reached the end of the other side of our pocket. So since I'm finished right here, I'm just going to go ahead and continue. So all we're going to do to even this out is do a quick row of single crochets. And it looks, if you've never done it on something like this before, it might look like it's a little complicated, but all you have to do, I'll show you, when you get to these corners, is kind of, instead of crocheting right into the corner stitch, just come down here and kind of go underneath it. And that will sort of smooth things out. I'll do a few more so you can see. Same goes if you get to these areas that have like a big loop. If you just go into the piece of yarn underneath it, that won't make that loop quite so prominent. So now it's just a little smoother. It's not perfect, but when we give it a little bit of a trim, that will kind of even that out even more. So we're going to chain 4. Use that 4th chain as our turning chain. Three single crochets, slip stitch to join as usual, then do back loops, single crochets to give it the ribbed effect, just like we did before. The only thing that is a little bit different about this is because we're doing this on a curve, when you start to get into really steep areas of the curve, like right here, I will probably skip over this stitch just to kind of keep things tight and keep it from getting like all wavy. And I would just suggest kind of eyeballing it after you do a couple of rows. Just look at it and make sure when you have it laid out flat like this that it lays really nice. Okay, so I've got my pocket lined up. It's centered with the end of the Henley neck is right here, which you can't see, but it's lined up with the center. Now all I'm gonna do is take one of these big fat needles, and I'm gonna basically just sew this on. I'm gonna sew it across the top here, down the sides, and across the bottom. And I have the bottom lined up with the trim at the bottom of the hoodie. The last thing to do is to add on the buttons. I'm just gonna stitch these on. I would any kind of buttons, just hand sew them on. You just want to make sure that you choose a size of button that can easily fit through that row of double crochet. And it's finished. Tuck this in here so you can actually see what's going on. It's very warm, nice and slouchy. You could obviously make a little bit of alterations to this if you didn't want it to be so baggy, but I have a lot of more fitted sweatshirts, and I don't know, I just kind of like hoodies to be kind of slouchy and comfy. So the pocket is nice and roomy, it's nice and long. Drawstrings actually work. Yeah, I'm really happy with this one, and the first one I actually made for my guy, so now we have these cute little matching hoodies. He wears his a lot, so I think it turned out really well. But yeah, so I hope you like this hoodie. If you make one, please tag me on Instagram. I would really love to see people making these or their own versions of them if you change it up a little bit. I hope you found this video helpful. If you like it and you want to see more from me or see me dance in the strobe lights, feel free to subscribe. I post videos 2 to 3 times a month. Thanks so much for watching this one, and I'll see you next time.